Understanding Gnosticism and what it has to do with systemically sustainable human growth and development. Gnosticism is a complex and diverse religious movement that emerged in the early Christian era, characterized by its distinctive cosmology, theology, and emphasis on secret knowledge, or gnosis. In terms of the studies and research of the foundation, there are 8 key points of Gnosticism being highlighted, and which, when better understood, can assist in laying the necessary groundwork for systemically sustainable human growth and development. The first is dualism. Gnosticism posits fundamental dualism between the material world, which is considered flawed and inferior, and the spiritual realm, which is seen as divine and transcendent. This dualistic worldview often portrays the material world as being created by a lesser, sometimes malevolent deity known as the Demiurge, while the true God is distant and unknowable. It is important to note that this expands beyond the duality of man and into a more esoteric realm, and even then must be studied to its inevitable conclusion that there exist different realms even within the parameters specified and as limited by the dual nature of humanity, especially as expressed in later Gnostic works. The later Gnostic works, of course, featuring the 3 different types of human thought, or the spiritual essence of humanity, as it is encompassed by the pneumatic, the psychic, and the hylic people. That, though there's many different variations of hylic or hynix or hynic, but even dualism in the Gnostic sense consists of more than just duality. The second feature of Gnosticism being considered is the cosmology. Gnosticism presents a complex cosmology that typically includes a series of emanations or eons emanating from the ultimate divine source. These eons represent different aspects of the divine realm and play a role in the creation and maintenance of the universe. This is one of those areas where everyone will likely have their own personal view or opinion, and while it remains important to the study of Gnosticism, it is not necessarily related to the studies required for establishing the groundwork or the foundations for systemically sustainable human growth and development, but it's still relevant to understanding Gnosticism and the many underpinning concepts that are necessary to drive sustainable growth. The third aspect of Gnosticism being taken into consideration is the idea of salvation through knowledge, or gnosis. Central to the Gnostic belief is the idea that salvation comes through spiritual knowledge, or gnosis. This knowledge is not merely intellectual, but experiential, involving a deep understanding of one's true nature, the true self. And again, this may be subjective to a degree, it may be objective to a degree, but in reality, this is sometimes known as perception versus perspective, which we will be exploring in other videos as well. Knowledge, of course, must be converted to wisdom, and therein lies the real challenge. It is easier to fool someone than it is to convince them that they have been fooled. And the history of Bernays and the torches of freedom and the utilization of the teaching of Bernays, social media influencers, clearly indicate that humanity has largely been played for the fool. So knowledge alone is certainly one answer, but how does one impart knowledge, and how do you encourage the student or even the master to not only consider the knowledge, but to convert it to wisdom? The fourth consideration of Gnosticism that we're examining is generally referred to as the divine spark. Gnosticism teaches that each individual possesses a divine spark or essence that is trapped within the material body. Salvation involves liberating this divine spark from the confines of the physical world through gnosis, leading to a spiritual enlightenment and a reunion with the transcendent divine. The fifth consideration of Gnosticism involves mythology and redemption. Gnostic texts often include elaborate mythological narratives depicting the origin of the material world, the fall of humanity into ignorance and bondage, and the journey of redemption and ascent back to the spiritual realm. These myths often feature figures like the Redeemer, who imparts the gnosis necessary for salvation, to some degree at least. And this borders on the Stoic approach to logic and reason, and through the philosophical approach of Nietzsche and the psychological approach of Jung, we can further equate the fall of humanity with the oppression and inhibition of the ability of the individual, the family, and even the local community to work for their maximum personal benefit or their personal gain, while the redemption, as it were, may be equated with the desire to educate, enlighten, and empower the individual, the family, and the local community in order to ensure that they are not oppressed, and that we can achieve a viable approach towards systemically sustainable human growth and development. The sixth aspect of Gnosticism that we are considering is the rejection of the material world. Gnosticism tends to reject the value and legitimacy of the material world, viewing it as a realm of illusion and suffering. This attitude is influenced by the belief that the material world was created by a flawed or ignorant deity and is thus inherently flawed and corrupt. For better or for worse, the fact of the matter remains that human nature is itself very much rooted in the physical realm, and thus due and complete consideration must be given to the materialist nature of humanity, including the desire for personal material improvement of the individual, the family, and the community. Another consideration common to the Gnostic teachings is secrecy and initiation. Now, while this is one that we're working to avoid, it is still worth considering, at least once the ambulance goes by. Gnostic teachings were often transmitted through secretive and initiatory means reserved for those deemed spiritually prepared to receive such knowledge. This emphasis on secrecy and exclusivity reflects the Gnostic belief in the esoteric nature of divine truth, and this practice of secrecy is one of those areas of Gnosticism that may have been prudent or even necessary in the Middle Ages, but is really seen as antiquated or even contrarian, or in direct contradistinction in some ways to the efforts of our foundation to introduce systemically sustainable human growth and development, but it is still a necessary point to consider. And the final consideration of Gnosticism that we're examining in further detail is generally referred to as ethical dualism. Gnosticism often embraces an ethical dualism that distinguishes between the spiritual and the carnal, encouraging adherents to transcend worldly desires and to pursue moral purity in pursuit of spiritual liberation. This, of course, ignores the inclusion, or at least fails to fully consider, those of the Gnostic psychic persuasion, which is not to say that they can read your mind, but rather it is used as a term to define those who are spiritually or at least mentally caught somewhere between the materialistic or physical nature of humanity and the more esoteric, ethereal, or even spiritual nature of humanity. So that is pretty much going to end it for Gnosticism Part 1. In the second part, we'll examine how it relates to systemically sustainable human growth and development. So, yeah, if you want to know more, let me know. Thank you. Bye. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment below.